that after a very long time we are having a young scholars meet in the department, because prior to the COVID situation, we used to do that very frequently with the students, with the scholars. But I'm really grateful to British Deputy High Commissioner Najita Di for conceptualizing this, that we must include the young scholars, that how they are thinking. And this program is also coming under the G20 initiative, is having the presidency this year. Now, this session has been divided into two parts. One part by the scholars, those who are doing research and in field in our department, and the other part is by the students who are doing their undergraduation and post-graduation. So I feel that it should be an interesting one, and last one we have done on 3rd of February with ORF, where all of you have presented very nice insights, and we have learned a lot from you all. I really thank you, Ajita Di. I think you must also speak a word to our students, because this is your brainchild that we must have this. Please, Ajita Di.
Thank you, Iman. Iman is an old friend, so he always lands me in a soup where I'm totally unprepared to say anything. But just taking a cue from him on young scholars, we've had an initiative at the British High Commission in Delhi. Our former High Commissioner to India had actually started an initiative which was called the Next Gen Outreach or Next Generation Outreach. So under that line, we're following that model even now, where we try to interact and engage with young audiences. And it doesn't have to be just like students, it's also young professionals from different fields. So I'm very happy that we have been able to provide this platform where young scholars can present their ideas and thoughts on this subject under discussion. And in future, like, I hope that we would be able to like do another program, something similar to this, where we can publish works by young scholars like those who would be presenting today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir and ma'am, for those kind words. Now, as we move on with this session, now we invite Professor Anandajyoti Mojumdar, Professor, Department of International Relations and former Dean, Faculty of Arts, Jadavpur University, on the stage to please chair this session. And now I would be calling out the paper presenters today. Shaurish Ghosh would be the first one to present his paper. Next up, Shohini Chattopadhyay and Annesha Shannal jointly would be presenting a paper. Then, moving on, Olokananda Nag. The fourth paper would be done by Ipshita Chakraborty. The fifth one, another joint paper by Devapriya Bhattacharya and Devlina Bhattacharya. And the sixth one, the concluding one, would be done by Oishik Bagh. Thank you. Now, before we start the session, I would like Pratiti Ghosh to please felicitate AGM sir. A round of applause for it. Yes. Okay.
All right. In fact, I would not take much of your time by using chair's prerogative. I will reserve my comments at this point of time, and I will speak, if necessary, towards the end of this session, because we have 40 minutes for 6 presentations. So I would rather, in fact, follow this order, printed on the schedule. And I would just suggest that the paper presenters, they should take 6 minutes at the most. And in fact, I would also suggest if they start with conclusion rather than the introduction. So basically, I would just say that you please, kind of present your main argument of the paper and just explain it. I think that will at least give us some opportunity to understand your perspective or your ideas on these issues. So we are looking for, from the young scholars, fresh perspectives and fresh insights. So without wasting much time, Shorish Ghosh, you have 6 minutes.
Hello. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon to the chair and to my fellow panelists. The time is very short, as sir has mentioned, so I'll try to be very quick. My title is UK's tilt towards the Indo-Pacific, analyzing the role of the stakeholders vis-a-vis Britain. So as we all know, it's the second day and we are discussing Indo-Pacific as a region of possibility and importance. Many esteemed speakers have already enriched us about the importance of the Indo-Pacific as a region, and many important dimensions have already been discussed. So I'm not saying there's too much thing to be discussed about, but let me be a devil's advocate and say that I'll start from my argument, which is a conclusion basically, as Sarah said, and say that in cricket, which is a very popular sport in Britain and India, that they say the game is not over before it is actually over. So let me give my introduction in saying that my argument is Britain's endeavor in the Indo-Pacific is very ambitious, but it may not be a smooth sail. I've tried to understand UK's possibility of becoming a very important player in the Indo-Pacific region through stakeholder analysis method. So what is a stakeholder analysis method? I will be very brief in telling you. It is basically a qualitative technique that provides a detailed review of the stakes of various parties correlated to the interests of the principal. The varied level of stakes for the countries in Indo-Pacific. In general, the stakes can be determined as vital, high, medium, and low as per their primary and secondary interests. Stakeholder analysis is generally relevant for those players who have high and medium stakes, which in this case are India, China, USA, Japan, ASEAN states, Australia, France as being a part of EU, and Russia. As there is a dearth of time, I will not be able to elaborate the role of the stakeholder vis-a-vis that of UK. I've tried to pen them in the book. I'm hopeful that people will read the book and come up with suggestions and criticisms. UK's interests in the region are varied, but mainly based on 3 levels. 1, economy. 2, security. 3, values. It concerns the rise of China as a power of major import, France, presence in the Indo-Pacific, which is backed by European Union, and Russian maneuvers to become an important stakeholder in the region. Secondary interests are combating piracy, armed robbery, maritime crimes, preventing illegal fishing in marine protected areas, and etc., etc. On the backdrop of these concerns, I've tried to create a stakeholder matrix, which is based on analysis of the role of stakeholders in the region. The matrix basically divides the stakeholders into 4 categories. First, supportive. Second, selective support. Third, varying support or suspicion. And fourth, antagonistic. In supportive categories, those who are the allies of UK, those who will be the allies of UK in Indo-Pacific, they are United States, Japan, Australia, and ASEAN countries. India is in the category of selective support. Then comes the category of suspicion. China is, of course, the first choice to be in the part of the suspicion category. And then, lastly, the antagonists. Though in IR we say there are no permanent friend, no permanent enemy, but only permanent interest. But considering the permanent interest, there are 2 countries who can be antagonistic in the Pacific, being Russia and France. Then I have broadened the congruence matrix and incorporated factors like economic aid, military aid, development, civil governance, diplomatic aid, etc. And to validate the claim that I've mentioned in 4 categories of the matrix. There are known parameters which stakeholder analysts often use to see whether the principal actor, that is Britain, will garner support or expect resistance in the endeavor. Hello? Yeah. The time is short. I'll go back to my conclusion and say that it may not be a smooth sail, but it can be argued that there are no smooth sails in politics. But let me be specific about why I feel so. The first thing, UK is not doing enough to ensure it's present in a region even after 2 years of integrated review. That is what the critics have to say. UK continues to put defense goals ahead of the regional relationship and is likely to alienate key players and threaten the balance of power region. So UK has to be focus its goal more on the integrated review, where it talks about more concrete zones rather than only defense-related zones. UK is developing relationships with regional players like Malaysia, Indonesia. Joint economic forums have been formed. Several visits have been taking place in ASEAN, but it has to be regularized. ASEAN is a very important player. UK has to play an important role to bring ASEAN to its own table. Maritime security is an indicator where UK is trying to be active, but maritime security is not about navies, but it's about cooperation with regional powers. For example, France, playing an important role with EU, exercises in Philippine Navy and Coast Guard, where EU has been sharing its information tool, which is IORS. UK has to come up with designs, concrete design to deal with China, EU, and Russia so that it can balance USA and India at the same time. There are evidences that UK is positively considering ongoing gaps in the implementation of the TILT and 2 parliamentary committees scrutinizing the policy. So UK has to be smart, and I'm sure it is smart enough and functioning independently to coordinate and consolidate its allies and maintain a fine balance between them. Britain has a capacity to become a major security provider in the Indo-Pacific, undoubtedly, but it has to make sure that it does not endanger the Euro-Atlantic security. UK already maintains 7 permanent presence in the in IOR, that is Indian Ocean region. I believe that London incentives in this Indo-Pacific is much less than in the 20th century. Anyway, it's, as being a smart power, it knows the game of balance, and fine balance between the past and present will ensure a very stable future for Britain in the Indo-Pacific region. Okay, I end by mentioning one thing, that it is important to understand what Alexis de Tocqueville had said, that when the past no longer illuminates the future, the spirit walks in darkness. So I'm sure Britain will illuminate in future by understanding the past and developing its present. Thank you.
Thank you, Shorish. Next paper is a joint paper by Shohini Chattopadhyay and Annesha Shanal. Shohini is not here. So, sorry, Annesha is not here. So Shohini will present the paper. Please, you have 6 minutes.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My paper is on the future of women in the Indo-Pacific region with a special emphasis on peace and security. Women have played a fundamental role in driving economic in the Asian Pacific region. Rapid industrialization, socio-economic changes have seen a significant increase in women in the workplace over the past 30 years. According to Asian Development Report 2015, women in Asian Pacific region 70% less likely to be in the labor force than men. The report also explained the reason behind such low percentage of women participation. One of the important reasons was women face a labor market that offers them a lower wages and lower quality jobs than their male counterparts, and disparity largely influenced by how they allot their time to the market and non-market activities. The International Labour Organization report towards better future for women and work, Voices of Women and Men, provided a detailed examination of attitudes and perceptions regarding working women. In the Asia-Pacific region, majority of both men and women show a preference towards female labor participation. According to ILO report, Indo-Pacific region, majority of women wants to work outside their home in paid jobs. But because because of the caregiving activities and household responsibility, they are unable to pursue their jobs. A specific problem of whole Indo-Asia Pacific region is limited progress in women's political empowerment, representation and voice compared to other global regions. All the states of the region have ratified Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. However, women representation in politics is below average. There are significant barriers for non-elite women to participate in political parties and systems. Local customs, norms, and frequently used to moralize rightful place for women is not politics. Moreover, violence against women who participate in politics advocate for human rights is very common in Asian Pacific region. ASEAN has adopted a regional framework to eliminate violence against women as ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on the Elimination of Violence Against Women. The Pacific Island Regional Plan 2010 to 15 emphasized on women's to peace building and security sector reform. Nepal's National Action Plan enables inclusive participation and protection of war widows in the post-conflict decision making. Australia's National Action Plan has sought to implement targets to increase women participation in security sector, especially as leaders and frontline role in Australian Defence Force. India was the first state to send all women peacekeeping force to Liberia in 2007, and this move encouraged Liberian women to join National Police Force, tripling the female applicant from 120 to 350 within the 2 months of arrival of Indian unit. UN Women, through collaboration with Department of Peacekeeping Operation and Center for United Nations Peacekeeping, provide support to capacity building effort of nations across the Indo-Pacific region to help women's access to peace and security operation. Over the last 5 years, UN Women in India, in collaboration with CUNPK, conducted more than 26 courses of UN peacekeepers, both men and women, on gender and sexual or gender-based violence prevention as a part of pre-deployment training. However, there is no institutional mechanism to prioritize action in the Indo-Asia Pacific region. As a result, women in conflicted areas do not have access to the commitment put in by Security Council Resolution 1325, which affirms strong role of women in peacekeeping and peace-building mechanism. Okay, I'm just concluding. Yes. Looking ahead, the focus, so I'm just concluding my paper here. Looking ahead, the focus of women participation in peace and security needs to extend beyond the peace process, emergence to recover post-conflict, post-disaster, and post-pandemic society. The gap in protection must be addressed. Countries in the region should be committed to tackling sexual and gendered violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next paper is by Alokanandanak.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alokananda Nag, and the title of my paper shall be The Future of Maritime Power Posturing in the Indo-Pacific Region Through the Means of Competition, Collaboration, and Containment. Here what we see is that the Indo-Pacific Pacific maritime region has become a quandary for international confidence building mechanisms and peace processes. The nature of this region is both complex and unique because it houses economic and military dimensions in the same breath. Globalization, as we see, has merged military and economic cooperation to such extent that they remain mostly inseparable. China and the US share distinct lines of action, and though this region serves as a domain for economic cooperation and consolidation of trade for both the states, the military dimensions pertaining to this area are different. The economic paradigm shift towards the region means the global preferences are going to eventually transform or change, indicating an anxiety for Atlantic powers and their economic fabric. Coming to China, what we see is that China has taken a hostile reactionary response to containment measures, and even though it cannot match the naval prowess of that of the US and China combined, it can, however, press an economic consequence in case of brinkmanship. The inability to cope up with such bifurcating responses, contrivances, allows the region to intricate a trade deficit which is lawful for both balance and deterrence. Middle East has largely remained a region for perpetual conflict, and the diversity of contemporary conflicts means the global economic order will seek to prioritize states with exponential growth rates and unconventional economic progression. Moving ahead to the Indian Ocean, we see that it's a significant and relevant body of water. It is the global trade route encompassing oil and energy trade, which is driving the force of the world's industry. It has political, economic, security, and world, which makes it important for all regional and global players. Due to its geostrategic and geoeconomic importance, it is the theater of a new game for global powers. The international system has gone through significant geopolitical transformations over the past few years. Rise of China, United States, pivot to Asia, and the Indo-US strategic partnership have challenged the dynamics of international politics. Compelled by the Chinese rise, United States is trying to maintain its influence over the region and preserves a status quo as dominant power. Indo-Pacific sector is a predominant lifeline for states maintaining economic development, and states like Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and South Korea, they depend on oil and other natural resources being traded through naval routes within this maritime domain. An upset of security and institution of hostility would produce similar fissures to global trade and economies as would the closure of the Strait of Hormuz or an interruption to the trading equilibrium on the Strait of Malacca. States in this maritime zone have yet to recover from the East Asian debt crisis and have yet to substantiate their status quo economic balance. Any dispute within this region in naval proportions would surely dent maritime transportation and would involuntarily seize naval trade, which might initiate another economic depression. Thank you.
You know, you have covered a huge canvas within a remarkably short span of time. Thank you. Next paper is by Ipshita Chakraborty.
Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Ipshita Chakraborty, and today I present to you my topic, that is India and the geostrategic relevance of Indo-Pacific. Now, the 21st century is being characterized by the resurgence in the vitality of the maritime domain and the confluence of geostrategic and geoeconomics. The Indo-Pacific domain is no exception to it. The US, China, Japan, India, and Australia have emerged as the key players in the region. The domain of Indo-Pacific is a strategic asset to India as it supports 80% of global oil supply and 95% of India's trade. India's commitment to a free, fair, open, and an inclusive Indo-Pacific will be contextualized at the backdrop of three factors: a belligerent China's ingress into the Indian Ocean associated with its string of pearl strategy, debt trap diplomacy, BRI project, etc. Second factor, Japan has emerged as India's main infrastructural investment partner in the region. Example, Asia-Pacific Growth Corridor, its investment in northeastern part of India, and Andaman Nicobar development projects. Third factor, US's shift from Asia-Pacific to Indo-Pacific with an incommensurable precedence being accorded to the term Pacific over Indo in the nomenclature of Indo-Pacific. Contrary to the US, India prioritizes the Indian Ocean region. India's approach to Indo-Pacific is in consonance with its approach in the IOR. The Indo-Pacific domain provides India with a larger area to expand its sphere of influence. Events in the IOR and South China Sea will entail specific ramifications in the maritime domain of Indo-Pacific, and vice versa. Thus, any attempt to dehyphenate the two will work towards India's detriment. To reap the benefits of this geostrategic domain, India's engagement with the domain has included an institutional, diplomatic, political, economic, and a military response. Institutionally, Prime Minister Modi in his Shangri-La Dialogue of 2018 upheld ASEAN as India's fulcrum to the process of its engagement with the Indo-Pacific. Diplomatically and politically, it includes a number of visits to the Pacific Island, which is in consonance with India's Sagar initiative to promote an inclusive and accommodative growth model. Economically, it includes India's commitment to blue economy and its extension of the line of credit to the Pacific Island. Militarily, although India has entered into a few of the logistics and military agreement with the Southeast Asian nation, it is characterized by an overall weak military presence beyond the Southeast Asian ambit. With the acceptance of domain as a strategic asset comes the challenges associated with it. Internally, red tapeism and the lack of maritime domain prioritization has to be addressed by India. Externally, a potent challenge apart from China is the US's increasing presence in the region. In 2021, US's John Paul Jones, exercising its freedom of navigation tenet, entered India's exclusive economic zone without its consent. Moreover, its supply of F-16 to Pakistan and its stringent environmental and data sharing policy in the region may act as a substantial fetter to the India-US cooperation in the region. Concluding my paper, thus an emerging India at the backdrop of changing power equation in the domain has certain security and national interests to cater so that any unilateral attempt to change the status quo can be resisted and an inclusive growth model may be achieved in the region. Thank you.
Thank you for completing the presentation well within time. Thank you. Now there is the presentation, once again a joint paper by Debopriya Bhattacharya and Debolina Bhattacharya.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today Debopriya Bhattacharya, I'm going to present the paper on evolution of India's maritime connection with Indo-Pacific, a reflection through geostrategic and foreign policy angle. I will be presenting this paper on behalf of me and my partner, Debolina Bhattacharya. Now, I wouldn't delve into much details of the concept since it has been already dealt with in a very eminent manner by my fellow speakers. So I will directly go into the moot points. The concept of Indo-Pacific entails a shift of theater of international power politics from Europe to the Asia. The Indo in the Indo-Pacific not only represents India, but also emphasizes the importance of Indian Ocean within Indo-Pacific. Following Abe's conference of two seas, India had formally recognized the concept of Indo-Pacific in the Shangri-La Dialogue. In this presentation, we try to trace the evolution of India's maritime connections and geostrategic interests with Indo-Pacific foreign policy diplomacy. Due to constraints of time, we briefly look into the concerned areas. We do not delve into the detailed view of all the foreign policy initiatives or geostrategic concepts, nor do we suggest any alternative strategy changes. We seek to analyze the contemporary politics of India within the Indo-Pacific in connection to maritime diplomacies and so limit ourselves to as such. The strategic importance of Indian Ocean stems from its sheer size of the trade conducted and its subregions. As can be seen in the map, the Indian Ocean serves as a gateway of trade with the Americas, Europe, Middle East, and even Southeast Asia. Also, the long unimpeded coastlines of the Indian Ocean had faced development earlier than the rest of the world due to its reliable pattern of cyclical monsoon winds, which makes deep sea navigation and sailing an easy task. The Malabar and the Coromandel coast of India had served as a commercial hub for interchange of products between the Egypt, the Levant, Persian India, Southeast Asia, and China. Thus, throughout the ancient period, India had remained connected to the rest of the world via maritime trade relations. Now, as can be seen from the quote, the problem is that many historians like K. M. Panikkar suffer from a historical bias that comes from studying history only from a Delhi-centric narration, consequently ignoring the coastal developments of the ancient period. For example, many southern dynasties, like that of the Cholas, had survived longer than the others due to the international trade and strong naval base. On the other hand, scholars such as Shivshankar Menon challenge this Delhi-centric bias and brings into the considerations the actions of dynasties with outward power projection. There are many examples of such powers, such as which is represented in many examples like Kalidasa's words, where he says, "Those who rule reach the seas were the ideal Raghukula kings," or the Tri-Samudrapati, or the rulers of the three seas, was the title given to the Satavahanas. Also, as can be seen from the slide, the colossal remains of the Angkor Wat of Cambodia and the Borobudur of Indonesia, and also the Vaikunta Perumal temple at Kanchipuram and Hampi are all evidences of the reach and extent of the soft and hard power of India's non-Gangetic areas. Now, we come to a more modern period, as in during the British times. During the initial days of the Raj, the Indian army had been used by the British to establish outpost colonies in areas like Malacca, Sumatra, Persian Gulf, and Aden. Consequently, the people of these areas of the erstwhile colonies of Southeast Asia, Africa, and West Asia, and also West Africa, viewed the Indian army as subordinate imperialists. And even after independence, therefore, the foreign policy conduction in these areas became very difficult. Also, the leaders of Free India, especially Nehru, viewed geopolitical strategic angle to be an unsuitable one for a peaceful post-independent framework and connected geopolitics with imperialism. India shared another connection with surrounding Indo-Pacific areas, and that was the diasporic one. It was created by the several laborers of Indian origin, known as coolies, and the educated Indians who were recruited into the colonial plantations of the Indo-Pacific. They still retain their prior culture and ethnicity. Now, I would not delve into the relevance of the concept of Indo-Pacific, as it has been already explained in a detailed manner by my previous fellow scholars. So, I will directly go into some of the projects that India have used to re-establish the already existing maritime connections and also forge newer ones. In the Indo-Pacific region, India wants to regain her control over the Indian Ocean and establish influence and dominance in the Indo-Pacific region, as well as counterbalance China and act as an alternative security provider for smaller powers. India aspires to combat not only conventional military threats, but also non-conventional ones in the Indo-Pacific, and wishes to maintain law, peace, and stability and promote cooperation. India aspires to forge alliances with not only powers of Indian subcontinent, but also Pacific powers. As can be found on the slide, India had used many such projects like the IPOI, Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, then there is Sagar. These two are projects which have been used by India to revamp the existing maritime connections and bring overall development in the Indian Ocean region. Then on the cultural front, there is the project Mosam, which aims to boost cultural connections with 39 other Indian Ocean countries. And also on the Pacific front, there is India's connection with Quad. Now, while India shares also a close relation with ASEAN, but at the Quad there is a problem. That is, India realizes within the Quad that its inability to be a complete net security provider to a region like USA, Australia, or Japan, and the risk of that a more formalized military partnership could bring. India, in an effort to not be permanently tagged into any particular team, seeks to delink Indo-Pacific from the Quad through a series of unilateral and bilateral exchanges with smaller Indo-Pacific countries themselves, including the ASEAN nations. This delinking can only take place by concretizing India's position in the Indian Ocean and institutionalizing frameworks that takes place and places importance to the Indo-Pacific. In order to conclude, I would only say that we may plainly state that in the context of greater international arena, the concept of Asia-Pacific that had gained traction in the 1980s is not a viable one. Instead, it is the Indo-Pacific that is more suited to the contemporary politics. Also, throughout the ancient times, India had continued to maintain maritime connections with the Indo-Pacific region, creating a blueprint of geopolitical perspectives and foreign policy diplomacy for the future generations. And in the present, it is the same blueprint that had inspired India to take up maritime connections within the Indo-Pacific from a geopolitical strategic outlook. After independence, getting ahead of a few years of negligence, change in contemporary politics, geopolitical and foreign policy compulsions had driven India to reconnect with Indo-Pacific and had reignited her aspiration to preserve the delicate balance of powers in the region as well as keep the Indo-Pacific as a free and open space for cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Debapriya. Now, the last paper of this particular session to be presented by Aishin.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. My paper is Sri Lanka in India's Indo-Pacific strategy, opportunities ahead. Now, due to the location of Sri Lanka in Indian Ocean and despite of its size, the role of Sri Lanka in terms of ensuring the maritime security in Indian Ocean region is significantly vital. In terms of strategic values of Sri Lanka is that as a Indian Ocean is rapidly becoming one of the most important ocean mass in global maritime trade. In terms of surveillance of maritime space, Sri Lanka has an important role to play due to its strategic location in Indian Ocean. Even though the size of the territory of Sri Lanka is comparatively smaller than most of the South Asian region, the close proximity of with the regional giant, India is one of the most significant strategic partner of Sri Lanka in the region. Now, due to the less territorial distance between Sri Lanka and India, close relations of two countries always ensure the mutual security requirements. Now, India and Sri Lanka are very close neighbors. As everyone is developing the international transport route, India also need to work on that particular thing. Sri Lanka's geopolitics has a huge impact on India's security. Sri Lanka's geopolitics is very important from India's security point of view. The elements of geostrategic relationship are always mutually exclusive. In a geostrategic environment, relations with your neighbor are naturally very important. The situation in neighboring country affects the country. Sri Lanka controls three continents of the Indian Ocean, like Asia, Africa, and Australia. Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka is now a major water hub with important ports such as Colombo, Galle, Hambantota, etc. Now, the crisis in Sri Lanka has cast a shadow of uncertainty over the island. Island countries' economic and political stability, which may have severe geopolitical repercussion on the countries of South Asia, particularly India. Now, from India's point of view, China's financial heft and Sri Lankan dependence on Beijing's largesse can greatly bolster Chinese leverage, which may lead to an increased use of Sri Lankan infrastructure for strategic military purpose, as evidenced by the recent docking of Chinese Navy scientific ship Yuan 5 in Hambantota port and allegations of Sri Lankan tankers providing mid-sea logistical support to Chinese naval ships. Now, the Sino-Indian geopolitical rivalry somehow coupled with India's aspiration of being a net provider of security and stability in the region, and that somehow made it imperative for New Delhi to deepen its developmental and humanitarian engagement with Sri Lanka. Now, since the onset of Sri Lanka's ongoing crisis, India has acted very friendly and extended the help to the island nation. With Colombo facing an acute shortage of funds, India extended $4 billion to keep the country's account afloat. India has vocally supported Colombo's demand for an international monetary fund bailout package and restructuring of its debt. In one assistance, instance, the Indian naval ship Gharial was deployed to deliver supplies of medicines, highlighting that expeditious manner in which India sought to extend humanitarian help to Sri Lanka. Now, if we look at this situation from Chinese perspective, now China's approach to the crisis has been cautious and underwhelming. Sri Lanka and China have enjoyed significant bonhomie for decades. As the final phase of Sri Lankan civil war ended, Sri Lanka found a new friend in China. Considering latest indifference in Sri Lanka's humanitarian situation and unsustainable borrowing, the China still though remains Sri Lanka's largest donor with $6.5 billion lending. Now, with this economic and political stake, China helped Colombo with $1 billion loan and a currency swap deal of $1.5 billion in 2020. China has also offered a token assistance with worth $76 million. Now, this is despite Sri Lanka's request for loan restructuring and additional financial support of $2.5 billion. Beijing has also tried to leverage the crisis and has been calculative in its approach. For instance, China has been attempting to expedite a free trade agreement with Sri Lanka by leveraging the former's request of for loan restructuring. It also seems that Beijing was attempting to use the opportunity to offer distinct bilateral assistance to Sri Lanka and deter the latter from approaching the International Monetary Fund. Now, its initial displeasure with the negotiations between Sri Lanka and International Monetary Fund further substantiated this argument. Yet China soon reversed its position and registered support for the ongoing negotiations. Now, and secondly, the Sri Lankan crisis has also begun to expose the sheer danger of unsustainable borrowing for the rest of the world. Having linked money with the grand ambitions, China does not want to set precedent for, fresh requests for loan restructuring, especially at the time when COVID-19 had significantly impacted several small economies. In this context, Sri Lanka's unilateral decision to suspend all its foreign debt repayments might have also triggered some alarm bells for Beijing. Perhaps, okay, sir, I'm just trying to conclude. Perhaps this also explains China's recent U-turn in Sri Lanka's negotiation with the IMF. So, from this, it is quite clear that difference of approaches between two giants, where Indian approach has always been rule-based, policy-based, humanitarian in nature, and also not taking advantages of this crisis. On the other hand, Chinese approaches is very tricky and try to gain out of the crisis. So in my concluding portion, what I'd like to say that as of now, Sri Lanka does not have any structured Indo-Pacific policy, and also India does not have any Indo-Pacific policy that includes Sri Lanka. But as Sri Lanka and India are the close neighbors, we share a strong cultural bond, cultural roots, cultural synergy. Sri Lanka should take the advantage of India being the neighbor, can take the aid from India, and not China, because China's support have always come with the condition, whereas Indian support have always been through humanitarian one, a friendly one, and thus Sri Lanka, it's high time for Sri Lanka to think of in which side Sri Lanka wants to be, and to balance that new theater in the Pacific region. Thank you.
Thank you, Ishik. And there is no question answer session. Do you have an announcement?
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, we won't. Towards the end. We have another panel.
There is not much time as I
Sir, I would just like you to give your observations about the entire panel now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Basic idea is I am, drawing this session to a close. And in fact, I was going to give my final comments on the session, but I thought there would be some kind of an announcement. Okay. So basically, I thank all the panelists for cooperating and for finishing this particular, session within time. Basically, we are only not even behind the schedule. This time was taken over by, kind of the head of the department. So basically, I will just in fact, not merely thank the, panelists. I have also appreciated many of the arguments they have presented. I wish they could have given more time to develop those arguments because they are aware. In fact, they have taken up huge kind of responsibility. For example, evolution of India's maritime connection, that is not really possible within 6 minutes, or establishing this kinds of, arguments that they're actually trying to project. I would simply say, in fact, three things. In fact, that were not really sufficiently covered by these presentations, but when we discuss relevance or strategic, kind of importance of Indo-Pacific region, we need to remember perhaps three things. One is that, when we talk about geopolitics, geopolitics is not international politics. Geopolitics is an intriguing concoction of reality and imagination. It deals with narratives. So there would be many narratives that would come up, and policies are actually cocooned within narratives. So narratives would justify the policies. So there would be many kinds of policies, based on all kinds of narratives, and everyone is free to build narratives that would suit their own interest, including UK and India. Second aspect is that if we try to look into this zone of Indo-Pacific, it is a kind of different zone in the sense we have now for the first time, effectively, Asian actors involved. And the old Western ideas that are still very relevant in many other things, many other areas, that is a balance of power, forming alliances, and thereby, establish peace, etc., might not work in Indo-Pacific region because you have different kinds of values coming in. If we don't have time, once again, I cannot develop my argument. But the idea is that there will be different kinds of values, Asian values essentially, in this particular zone working, and therefore, Western principles might not work in this particular zone. And the third important aspect that I would like to point out, that is, you have the presence of so many actors in this particular zone right now. Germany is interested, France is interested, UK is obviously interested. Now, once again, you'd find major powers coming together into this particular zone. Apparently, all this, kind of participation is to counter, Chinese threat or rise of China and things like that. But presence of so many actors would also act as a check on Indian aspirations to become a great power in this region. As a result of that, all kinds of engagement among states actually depend on some form of balance of interests, and therefore I do not really see that there would be, it's a kind of simple kind of states among major powers in this region against one cohesive monolithic threat. That is not going to happen. There would be huge competition in this particular zone. And at one point of time, obviously, I wrote a paper on with my colleague, Shivashish Chatterjee. And obviously, both of us. So, in fact, we had a debate with regard to whether this zone will become a zone of hope, as Shivashis would argue. And I was obviously thinking a zone of fear, as my inclinations are. So I think that geopolitics in this particular region would be very, very important in the coming days, not because of the simple, kind of argument that there is China and wolf warrior diplomacy. You have to fear China, but there would be a completely different, power competition, power game involving European, kind of powers, Western powers, as well as Asian powers in this region. I once again thank all my panelists for giving serious food of thought, and thank you very much for your cooperation. Thank you.
I request all the paper presenters, those who have presented their papers, to just submit it as in a paper form so that we can publish another book with these papers that has been presented today. So Aditya has liked all the papers, so we are planning to publish another book.
Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, please be seated. We are supposed to start off with our second panel for the session. I would express my earnest gratitude to all the audience present here for their patience and sheer encouragement. With this, we move towards the second panel for the session, and I would request Professor Dr. Kamran M.K. Mondol to kindly come up on the stage and introduce us to the. I request Anisha to kindly felicitate, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. So, since morning we are tired of listening Indo-Pacific, everything. Still we have some paper presenters with us. You have to enjoy or have to give your patience exam. But it is good to listen that they will get only 5 minutes. So within 20 minutes, four paper presenters will complete. So, yeah, it is good to listen also that this is the young scholars session. So all the young aspirants, scholars, they will present their paper. So we have 4 paper presentation this time. B. Chanda and Subhangi Sur. B. Chanda and Subhangi Sur. Please come here. Their title is Marine Deterioration and Solutions in India and Indo-Pacific. We have another paper that would be presented by Nilanjan Odhikari and Adrija Maiti. Nilanjan Odhikari and Adrija Maiti. Come here. Another paper that would be presented by Sthapita Sutradhar and Barna Bani. Next, we have another paper that would be presented by Prasangna Paul and Oisiki Chaudhary. Okay. Okay. Joint papers, only one. Who would present it? They should come here.
Okay, she's sitting, she's trying, so she's.
Okay, whoever will present, you come here, no problem. যে প্রেজেন্ট করবে সে থাকো দুজনই করছো just you call her, okay, otherwise they don't have seat, no? You are jointly presenting? You are presenting? Okay, she is there. Okay. Now who is coming? B. Chanda and Subhangi. You, B. Chanda? Your name is? Subhangi? You are Subhangi. Okay.
There will be another speaker who will be joining us from Assam for this session.
Oh, for this session only, continuation. And then next one that, okay, Subhrajit Kumar.
So we'll welcome you, so we'll join from Assam.
Arjun Chatterjee? He will join later. Okay.
Hello.
Okay, just online. Okay, conference. Okay, that's good. Yeah. Subhangi, just, we should start now. Subhangi, just keep in mind that time, okay?
Okay, sir.
Okay. Now,
Good
Subhangi,
afternoon,
sir.
everyone. My name is Shivangi Shur. I am an undergraduate student in the Department of International Relations, Jadavpur University. Unfortunately, my co-presenter B. Chando, or Biduda as we know, couldn't attend today's session. First of all, my sincere thanks to Dr. Kamran Mondal sir for chairing this session. Lastly, my gratitude to the audience and to all speakers for gracing the session today. As we can see on the screen, the topic of the joint paper will be Marine Deterioration and Solutions in India and Indo-Pacific. Can we change to the next slide? To summarize the abstract even further, the paper will revolve around 2 major environmental challenges in India and Indo-Pacific, which are IUU, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, and marine plastic pollution in India and Indo-Pacific. Next slide. Our paper will at first underline the marine threats in the Indo-Pacific. Environmental threats in the Indo-Pacific region have far-reaching security implications that have the potential to shape the strategic equation between the bordering nations. Ma'am, can I please request to reduce the volume a bit? Oh, okay, ma'am. Sure. Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Furthermore, the threat of marine plastic would be a major concern as garbage patches have already been found in the Indian Ocean, North Pacific Ocean, South Pacific Ocean, and the Bay of Bengal. These garbage patches pollute the ocean waters, affecting marine life and people's livelihood. Another major threat in IUU fishing, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, is that it is a major issue in both Indian and Pacific Oceans, as large populations of the littoral states are dependent on fisheries, both for animal protein and incomes. Next slide. The next part of our paper will further highlight India's marine security challenges in the Indian Ocean. According to Indian Navy, as many as 392 reported incidents of illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing were monitored in 2021 compared to 379 in 2020 in the Indian Ocean. If IUU fishers in India target vulnerable stocks that are subject to strict management controls, efforts to rebuild those stocks to healthy levels will not be achieved, thus threatening marine biodiversity, food security for communities who rely on fisheries resources for protein and their livelihoods. Similarly, India has a long coastline spanning 7,517 kilometers. India's 9 coastal states house a population of 420 million. Of this, about 330 million live on or within 150 kilometers of a coast. 3 in 4 metro cities in the country are located on the coast. Every year, tons of garbage composed of plastics, glass, metals, sanitary products, clothes, etc. are dumped into the ocean. However, plastic contributes a major portion of about 60% of the total debris that reaches the oceans. Next slide. The next part of our paper will discuss about India's stake in tackling the above-mentioned environmental challenges. Some of those are the Quad, comprising of India, Australia, Japan, and the US, in May 2022 announced a major regional effort under the ambit of Indo-Pacific Marine Domain Awareness, IPNDA. It is expected to catalyze joint efforts of India and other Quad partners towards addressing IUU fishing in the Indo-Pacific region. Furthermore, India is also a signatory to the United Nations Coastal Clean Seas campaign. Further, from 1st July 2022, single-use plastics have already been banned in India, which is a major polluting substance. Also, steps like the use of technology to track or stop plastic from entering our oceans, a collaboration of activities at a local level, regional level, national and international level has already been considered by the Indian government. However, the plastic treaty has to be legally binding and not just be voluntary. Also, the entire plastic life cycle, right from extraction to dumping, has to be taken into consideration. Can we change to the next slide? Keeping in mind the lack of initiatives by the Indian government in tackling the environmental challenges, the last part of our joint paper will highlight some of the future undertakings that India can execute to acquire sustainable utilization of maritime resources. Our paper will focus on the point that developing a treaty that just focuses on marine litter and microplastics would not just be the concern and must be avoided due to the fact that marine litter and microplastics are both sourced from plastic waste generated by post-consumer use, primarily from land-based sources. Furthermore, more focus on blue economy initiatives, better vessel monitoring systems, observer programs, catch documentation schemes, inspection of vessels in port and at sea would be required to tackle the problem of IUU fishing. Next slide. With this, yes sir, okay sir. With this, I would like to end my presentation. I hope I was able to convey and communicate the purpose and the findings of our paper.
I would also like to thank Dr. Kamran Mondal sir for chairing this session, and also to the audience for their time and their attention. Thank you.
Subhangi, this is a good attempt and good paper.
Thank you, sir.
Now, I would call Nilanjan Odhikari and Adrija Maiti to present their paper on illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing in the Indo-Pacific.
Hello. So, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to the chair and all the professors and my friends present here. So, before I begin, Shubhangi already highlighted some of the aspects of IUU fishing, but our paper is solely based on the concept and idea and issues regarding IUU fishing, and we will try to dive a bit deeper into the several issues related to it. Can we have the presentation up? Yeah, sure.
Next slide. IUU fishing is on the rise and one of the greatest non-traditional maritime security threat in the Indo-Pacific region. It has even replaced piracy. It has the potential to destroy the marine ecosystem and has caused rift between various fishing nations and has the potential to threaten the geopolitical stability. Also, it is associated with other forms of human rights abuses such as child trafficking, human trafficking, arms smuggling, and so on. And we'll be now going to the implications of IUU fishing on society and other areas. So now you're going.
Next slide. Yeah, so for methodology, we have used literature review along with the usage of secondary data available on the issue of IUU fishing to reach the objectives of this paper. Next slide, please. Yeah, so first coming to the security issues related to IUU fishing. Due to IUU fishing, we have also seen rise of other non-traditional security threats like arms smuggling, human trafficking, which come along with it. Moreover, due to the destruction of local economies and livelihood of fishermen, we see a rise of piracy, which also works as a source of terror funding. Moreover, when we come to political issues, we can see political responses from Regional Plan of Action, IPMDA by Quad, and several agreements like the Cape Town Agreement and the PSMA, which prove the political significance for the international fora regarding IUU fishing in the Indo-Pacific. Moreover, the confrontations between the Tamil Nadu state government and the central government of India prove the importance of IUU fishing politically to India. Next slide, please. Yeah, so coming to the impact on economy, we have listed some of the data regarding IUU fishing on the slide. I am not reading out the data, but explaining it, I can say that due to IUU fishing, local economies suffer, and it leads to the depreciation and downfall of gross national product and the value of legal fish stock in the market, which stresses the national budget.
Yeah, now the impact on society is far-reaching, has far-reaching implications on society. There has been instances of full-blown trawler war between fishermen, and there's loss of livelihood, which is ultimately impacting the economy. And the next slide, please. Yeah, and the environmental impact are listed as below.
Seabed